Welcome to the Houston Technology Center. I am Walter Ulrich, President and CEO of the Center, and we are so pleased and privileged today to host these wonderful organizations, Rights for Girls, the McCain Institute, Google, on a subject, as I said, of such importance. And I'm especially pleased to welcome Senator Cornyn, Congressman Judge Ted Poe, and Mrs. Cindy McCain. Thank you so much for being here, for devoting your time for this important subject. As a former Marine, I can appreciate the service of your son, who's a Marine, another son who's an officer in the Navy, and of course, your husband, who's an American hero. Would you please extend my thanks to your husband for the announcement yesterday that after so many years of service, he's willing to continue to serve his country into the next decade. Thank him so much. While technology is not the answer to all our problems, it amazes me what technology can do and what the support here that we have from the Houston Technology Center can do to help change the world. The Houston Technology Center works day in and day out closely with entrepreneurs, helping them with their early stage companies to make a difference for the community, for the state, and of course for the nation as well. And we believe that the application of technology to serious problems can help us in so many ways. And what more serious problem that we have than a problem of human trafficking, and especially trafficking of children. What a wonderful time, and hopefully the right place to host this event. Now, I do want to tell you about a couple of companies that the Houston Technology Center is working with. One of them that graduated with us in 2008 is Bellicum Pharmaceuticals. So we work in IT, in energy, in life sciences, in aerospace, in materials, and in logistics. Bellicum Pharmaceuticals has found a way to take your own genetic material, to regrow it in the billions in a way that will attack cancer cells without attacking the cells in the rest of the body, offering the promises to have a cure for hard body cancer tumors without affecting all the other parts of the body, perhaps making chemotherapy obsolete. More relevant to this event today, we have a current client that's still working with a new product. Sharon Simmons had a brother who was the victim of a criminal act. And we all have cell phones, but it's very hard to anonymously report and record what's going on. Her program, Trafalgar Systems, is designed so that anybody with a cell phone who has this simple app as it gets completed will be able to record and then anonymously report crimes as they occur. One more word about the Houston Technology Center. Since our founding in 1999, we have helped over 300 companies. These are homegrown companies like Bellicum and Trafalgar Systems that I've mentioned to you. And they are demonstrations that technology can, in fact, bring solutions to our problems. You all know well that one of our country's most innovative technology companies is Google, and Google is a key sponsor, and we're so glad to have Google today. Many of you know that Google was started by a couple of brilliant engineers, and those engineers are absolutely the ideal of what the entrepreneurs at the Houston Technology Center look forward to do. Google today provides employment for many, many thousands of people around the world, and hundreds of people here in our great state of Texas. Google's founders are an inspiration, and we join Google in believing that technology can make a real difference. Well, without further ado, let us move on with this important program. To kick it off with an individual who is a successful businesswoman in her own right, a generous philanthropist, and a leader for this very cause that brings us together, Mrs. McCain. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you. Thank you very much for being here. I am indeed very honored to be a part of this today and to have the two gentlemen that I'll be introducing to you that need no introduction for all of you in Texas, but to be a part of this and for all of us to be able to have a conversation about just this issue is so vitally important. I want to thank those of you from the media that are here. Thank you for covering this issue. Thank you for being interested in this issue. It's an important issue. What brings us here today is an issue that the United States of America and this world faces every day, and it's deadly. Let's be very clear, this is a deadly issue. And unless we can get our act together nationally and internationally, we're going to lose more children every year to this problem than anything else. So without further ado, I'd like to invite up here our two distinguished members of Congress. First of all, Senator Cornyn. I know all of you know him. He needs no introduction. Please welcome your senator, and of course, Congressman Judge Poe. Please join us up here. These two gentlemen, single-handedly on Capitol Hill, are going to make this world a better place. On this issue, they are tough. So please, let's sit down and let's get to work, if I may. If I can say the first thing on this, let's be very clear. There is no such thing as a child prostitute. Absolutely. And I detest and dislike anybody, first responders and other people that are not educated on this issue, calling our children that, prostitutes. No child grows up and says, gee, I think I want to be a prostitute. Doesn't happen. These kids are victims, victims, victims. I'd like to first begin with both of you. The question I'd love to ask other panelists is, how'd you get into this? What made you want to be a part of trying to solve this problem?
Thank you, Cindy, for what you do and helping make the country a lot safer place for young children. I appreciate that. I am a former judge in this county. However, none of you look familiar. And spent 22 years on the bench as Senator Cornyn was also a judge. So I approached things in Congress from that point of view. I was a criminal court judge, and victims have always been a great concern to me. When I got into Congress, Jim Costa, a Democrat from California, and I started the Victims' Rights Caucus to promote and advocate for victims. And trafficking is one of those issues that has a lot of victims. I first got involved when I traveled on the Foreign Affairs Committee both to the Ukraine and to Central America and saw what was happening in foreign countries, and then realized it's happening in the United States. In Houston, Texas, my hometown, is one of the hubs for sex trafficking of minors throughout the United States because of our location. And learned more and more about this issue of trafficking and the scourge. And because of that, we worked with a lot of folks, bipartisan, to promote the concept of let's fix this problem. Let's fix it and start out with the most important thing, and that's the victims. And as you said, Cindy, treat victims of this scourge as victims of crime and not as criminals. That's the first thing we have to do. Go after those traffickers, those slave traders, put them in jail. That's why we build prisons. But also, we need to go after the business model, which is the consumer. And those folks, like victims, shouldn't be called prostitutes. The demand individuals should not be called Johns. I mean, John was a good guy. He was in the Bible. He was a good guy. Those people should be called child abusers. And that's what they are. And put those child abusers and hold them accountable for what they are doing and make sure that the law punishes them as well. And so that's what the Victims of Trafficking Act does, is punish the offenders, punish the child abusers, tries to rescue the victims of crime and take care of them. And just one statistic, looked up on the website yesterday, use that high-tech stuff, if I know how to use a website. There are about 13,000 animal shelters in the United States. That's good. I mean, I'm all for them. I got 3 Dalmatians. I call them the weapons of mass destruction. And we got one of them from a shelter in Dallas. 13,000. But there are about, according to Shared Hope International, about 300 beds in the United States for minor sex trafficking victims. So we got a lot of work to do to rescue and find places for these young children, primarily females as well. So that's the short version, Cindy.
Cindy, my involvement with crime victims really started with my work as Attorney General of Texas, where I was responsible, my office was responsible for administering the Crime Victims Compensation Fund. And this is a fund created by fines and penalties of people who commit crimes to help people who are the victims of those crimes. And thus the model really that we drew from in the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act, where we take the fines and penalties paid by the people who create the problem at the demand side, as Ted says, and funnel that money to the people who are damaged and hurt by this illegal activity, and to help rescue them and help them begin to heal. But as we all know, there's a huge resource problem, which as Ted has pointed out. And yesterday in Austin, we had a similar event to this, and people pointed out, well, how do we fund the beds? And how do we get a safe place for these children to stay while we are trying to help them recover? And it's a big problem. But this, we predict that this model will produce as much as maybe $30 million to start of additional funding, which will be designated strictly for the victims of human trafficking. So I'm just glad to be working with my friend Ted Poe, him on the House side, me on the Senate side. But as you know, this is a bipartisan issue. This is a nonpartisan issue. We've got 30 sponsors in the Senate bill. It passed the Senate Judiciary Committee with unanimous vote. All Republicans and all Democrats came to the Senate floor with the consent of 100 senators. Then we ran into a little speed bump. Well, as you know, Cindy, that doesn't happen very often.
No, it doesn't.
But we ran into a little speed bump, but I'm confident we're going to get this done, and hopefully as early as next week. But thank you for your leadership and great lending visibility and to this important issue.
This is such an important issue. For me, I ran into human trafficking face first. I was in a small kiosk in India. I won't go into the length of the story, but I saw it. And when I realized what I was looking at, 50 little girls that were, it was kind of like a lightning bolt that hit my forehead. I realized that these little girls are being trafficked. But I'm ashamed to tell you, I walked out of that kiosk in Calcutta and I didn't do anything. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't sure I'd really recognized it. I walked out and didn't do anything. With that said, what do you account for the awareness being at a much higher level, and why people are so interested now? Is there a reason for that, or is it just because it's time and we finally are in a position to recognize it and talk about it?
I think it's both. There's awareness that there wasn't before,
Yeah.
and it's for a lot of reasons. You're part of the reason. Google and the media is the reason, explaining what is taking place in the United States. And members of Congress, as the senator said in the Senate, the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act in the House, there were 11 bills, and they were bipartisan, nonpartisan. In my bill, I teamed up with Carolyn Maloney, a Democrat from New York, and there is nothing more bipartisan than Carolyn Maloney from New York, Democrat, and Ted Poe from Texas, Republican. We don't even speak the same language. But they passed overwhelmingly the House, and that's because the public, organizations, the victims groups have brought this to the attention of the whole country, and Congress is going to do something about it, and so are the American people.
Cindy, to me, the things that make this so hard are most of this activity occurs outside of the sight and the awareness and the knowledge of most regular Americans. I mean, they don't run in these circles. They don't purchase these services, and they're just not aware of it. But I agree with Ted that technology has become a big part of the challenge, because you can actually do this out of sight, out of mind. But we can also use those same technology tools to help us deter and to arm people to protect themselves from this. The other part of this is, to me, is unique about this is the victims don't necessarily consider themselves victims, at least initially. You know, this is my boyfriend, or, you know, I run away from home and, you know, he's taking care of me, only to find out that this is the beginning of their worst possible nightmare. So this is a unique area, but I think a unique time and a unique opportunity for us to all pull together and do something about it.
Well, technology has become so helpful in this arena, and that sounds like an understatement, but the new tools that are out now like Spotlight from the Thorn Group, et cetera, where we can actually aid our first responders in a way that they can cross-talk to each other across platforms, but also be able to be notified and be able to track certain individuals that they have seen, they thought they saw. And this tool, I'm really making this a light talk on this, but this tool enables our first responders to be much more effective, much more thorough, and gives them a greater ability to be able to do something about the problem. We tested it in Arizona, beta tested it over the Super Bowl, and I know that you all have a bowl coming up here pretty soon too. It was remarkable. It's a game changer in this arena. It's an absolute game changer. Again, technology in all this. But with that said, from the technology side, I want to go to the underbelly of it. And I'll pick on my favorite people, Backpage.com. That's a perfect example, in my opinion, of the downside to technology. I'd like to hear from you all what not only your opinions, but what you think we can do about that.
Well, there's obviously a huge challenge here in a country, in a free and open country that believes in right of free expression, and to try to deal with the technology and the content issue, and who it is we're going to hold responsible. Not necessarily the technology that provides the means to communicate, but the people who initiate the message and who actually are benefiting financially and otherwise from the process. Yesterday, we had one of our speakers talk about Backpage, and I know Senator Mark Kirk, this has been something that he's been working on a long time, and you almost can't have a conversation without him going after the people who profit from Backpage. But I went online yesterday after our program and looked to see what was available on Backpage in Austin, and it is chilling. And of course, I'm sure virtually all of it is misrepresented in terms of the age of the women who are basically selling their, quote, escort services and the arrangement. As you know, given our close proximity to the border, we're very familiar with illegal immigration emanating from Central America or Mexico or around the world, but the fact of the matter is 2/3 of trafficking occurs right here domestically in the United States. It's not just an international phenomenon, although there is certainly a component to that. I'm thinking about a young woman who I met from El Salvador a few years ago who, for $6,000, her family paid to have her brought to the United States and delivered to New Jersey. That didn't work out too well, but she ended up working for basically her trafficker in a bar here in Houston and servicing 10, 12, 15 men a day. And basically the threat was, if you go to the police or the authorities, you're going to be deported. You're going to be treated as a criminal. And so she felt trapped. And just to think that that sort of thing occurs here as a result of international travel and trafficking, but also what just occurs here locally or around the state of Texas is chilling.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, Texas has a high number of, like you said, human trafficking incidents here, but Texas also has some great legislation and some great laws on the books about this too. Tell me how we go about educating the general population in how to recognize a trafficked child. I mean, I know you both know a great deal about this. How would you tell them how to recognize a trafficked child?
Well, prevention is very important as opposed to once a child is trafficked. So we start on the front end of prevention, and that starts with parents. We have to realize, and I mean, I have four kids, 11 grandkids, and we'll show the slides later, but parents have a responsibility to take care of their young people. And a trafficker is not an old guy in a trench coat. A trafficker will be a young man, a good-looking guy, 21, 22 years of age, and he'll be at the mall. And if you're a parent, don't ever drop your daughter off alone at the mall. That's just a recommendation, because that's it's not a court order. That's how it gets started, by those folks that roam the malls who want to traffic and pick up girls and young men, and then they're in the system. So prevention is very important. And then watching out for folks. And these trafficked victims, who they are victims, they're hard folks to work with. If they've been in the system a long time being trafficked, they're mad at everybody. They don't trust anyone except maybe the trafficker, the person that put them in this slavery. So we have to realize that as a community and understand that recovery is a long-term process with these victims. Like Children at Risk do a great job with young people. And so we have to do both of those things. And I think as the public, we need to understand it's all about money. The days of the drug dealers and the drug traffickers making all the money are over, because worldwide, drugs are still the number one source of income for illegal activity. But right behind it is human trafficking, sex slavery. And the reason is because drugs are sold one time. Little girls are sold multiple times a day. The cost of apprehension is less, the risk is less, and the consequences is less for those in the trafficking enterprise. And so we're trying to fix that, but it's awareness, but it's the money, prevention, and looking for opportunities when you see young people. It just doesn't look right, whether the person's on a plane by themselves or whatever. Senator?
Well, I think part of the paradigm shift we've seen with recognizing what you said earlier, Cindy, which there is no such thing as a child prostitute, and treating these children not as the criminal but as the victim. That's been a cultural shift, really a paradigm shift in the way we view them. But there's a lot of great local programs, and I'm thinking, for example, things like Girls Court right here in Travis County, in Houston, Harris County, that does a good job providing services to these victims, because many times the biggest problem that law enforcement has is these frequently are runaway kids in the first place, and once they're detained by law enforcement, their first opportunity, they're gone again. Because again, they may be so immature or not realize that they are what they're in for if they stay in this sort of lifestyle. So I just think there's a lot of work being done, but the visibility that's being brought to this by this event today and just by the public's awareness, I hope we'll do what Ted said. We'll keep our eyes out. We'll look for suspicious circumstances that just don't seem right. We'll ask questions, and we will report our concerns to law enforcement so they can investigate.
I like to tell people, if you're in an airport or in a bus station or in a mall or anything else, and you see something and your gut tells you something's wrong. I mean, I get my mother antenna up. My mother stuff goes up. I tell people, call somebody. There's no harm in reporting anything. You might just save a life. And I continually tell people that, because I'm sure you hear it too. I'm just one person. I can't do anything about it. Well, that's not true. One person can do a whole hell of a lot if we put our mind to it. One of the things that we had talked about, I know we were back in Washington and a couple of other things, is what do we do? You touched on earlier about our customer. At home, we're just beginning to deal with this in Arizona right now. It's the kind of thing, I talk to men's groups and they nod their heads, but it's kind of like, back off, I'm not going to do that. How do we change the language, change the appearance, and change what this is with our customers?
Well, we need to call the people that purchase
Child
sex slaves as criminals that they are, and they are aiding and abetting this criminal enterprise known as human trafficking. And need to be treated as such. And we need to try to take the profit out of this. Part of the one aspect of the legislation we discussed in the back room as we were getting ready is some of the forfeiture provisions. For example, the bar here I mentioned that where this young immigrant woman from El Salvador is basically trapped or was trapped. We need to shut down that enterprise and take the money from that forfeited business and that real estate and funnel it back into programs that will help provide beds and a safe, secure place for women like that to get better and recover. And that's part of why I think this is not, this isn't a panacea what we're doing, but I think it's a good step in the right direction.
Judge?
There's a couple of comments I'd like to make. One, males are the primary abusers of children. As a community and as parents, we have an obligation to raise our sons and grandsons the right way to treat women with the proper respect, prevention. But also, as the senator mentioned, these child abusers not only take their money and their assets to fund victim services, but I think people need to know who they are. You talk about back page and publicizing certain things. What if we had a back page for the child abusers convicted in the United States over the last month or so? When they start seeing the photographs of certain people, they might stop this conduct. That's just a thought.
Yeah. You know, we used to do that in Arizona. We used to publish their pictures in the newspaper. When I was growing up, I can remember that. And I went to our newspaper at home and said, well, why don't we do this again? And literally, they said to me, ooh, but they might get hurt. Their wives might hurt them at home. Are you serious? I mean, I was dumbfounded. This is the newspaper at home. Anyway, my rant's over. I got the high sign. It's time to take questions, if we may. And there's people with microphones.
My name is Dr. Vivian Dorsett. I'm with Foster Care Alumni of America, Texas chapter. And I think the issue of the foster care population will be addressed in our next panel, but I wanted to know how foster care is on your radar as it pertains to the sex trafficking of children.
Quick comment, that's a tremendous issue because my understanding is in domestically trafficked victims, 2/3 of them at some point in their life, they were in foster care. Now that can mean whatever you want it to mean, but that's an issue we got to deal with is foster care. Some legislation passed the House that deals with that issue as well because of that statistic that I gave you.
I would just add that we were discussing the 60-some thousand unaccompanied children who came from Central America last year alone, up through Mexico, being placed with family members here in the United States, and there's no oversight, no follow-through to determine what the living conditions are or what's happening to these children. And as Ted Poe pointed out to me earlier, there's not even a requirement they be literally related. They could be godparents, whatever that is, friend of the family. But you can imagine the conditions for abuse, particularly once these children have become part of this criminal enterprise being used as a commodity and shipped up here to the United States. Is it possible that some of them are being trafficked here in the United States after being placed with a family member or a friend? And I think the answer is absolutely, and that ought to scare and concern all of us.
Hi, thank you for presenting. I'm
Could you
Ann
introduce
Chandler,
me?
and I work for Tahirih Justice Center and the National Human Trafficking's Victim Assistance Program, and I just was thrilled to hear you speak about the enhanced forfeiture protections as well as Section 113's effort to really enhance restitution of survivors. And it seems like this bill really loops in more property there for programs, sorry, and for victims. And now my question, we see a lot of plea bargaining here in Houston, where instead of trafficking, we end up with movement of girls and smuggling and harboring. What happens in this case to those funds? Does this bill also have, thank you, enhanced protections where that forfeiture money stays there for survivors?
Well, that's the sole purpose for which those fines and penalties can be used under this law. This is not a fungible amount of money that can be used or siphoned off for some other purpose. And based on the statistical average for the people convicted of the crimes for which these funds and penalties are forfeited or paid, we estimate that there ought to be as much as $30 million a year just to start with. I think it'll be a great pilot program for us to see what we can do. But this is essentially it's like a mandatory assessment, a mandatory penalty. Can't be plea bargained, can't be reduced. So this is like a mandatory minimum sentence. In this case, it's a mandatory fine and penalty that can be used solely for that dedicated purpose.
Thank you for being here today. I'm Nikki Rich now, and I'm co-founder of Freedom Place, which was the first long-term rehabilitation facility in Texas. We were founded in 2012. When I found out in 2010 that children did not have a place to go to, underage American children, I was determined to get a place started in Houston. I would attend Children at Risk conferences and many conferences, and they would say, we have to have a place for children. When I started it, I realized why no one was doing it. We have to have money for these children. I mean, we can talk about the statistics and the problems all day long, but until there is money for other people to start these programs, it's just not going to happen. I have raised a lot of money to fund Freedom Place, and fortunately I live in a very philanthropic city, and they have done that. But we need more, and we have to have money, and I assume that's going to be part of the bill.
I'll weigh in on that. That is the issue. That's why there's so few beds nationwide. There's so few organizations like yours, is because there's not enough money. And in the future, still money has to be raised through the private sector. But make the criminals pay for the system they have created. Make them pay the rent on the courthouse. And that's when they're convicted in federal court that they lose their assets, or it's forfeited, and it goes into that specific fund. Now, why a specific fund? So that Congress later doesn't take money out of that fund and pay down the national debt or something else. So it goes for shelters, victim services, and also training for peace officers so they can recognize these victims. So that's why the funding mechanism is added in the Senate. Well, it's a good bill. It needs to be passed right away.
Bob Sanborn with Children at Risk. Mrs. McCain, you mentioned how Texas has great legislation going after traffickers and helping in the fight against trafficking. I'm wondering, Senator and Judge, as we look across the country, Texas has all this great legislation, and one of the great pieces that was passed was the training of law enforcement to understand what was happening with trafficking. Before trafficking, law enforcement would say, well, I'm not sure. Before that legislation, law enforcement would say, I'm not sure there's really trafficking happening in my community. Now that they've been trained, they understand this. Is there enough movement at the federal level to do work like this so that in all states we have legislation like this? Can this happen just at the federal level? Or do we have to motivate people state by state to do what's happened in the state of Texas?
Well, the first part of that on the federal, my understanding, if all of this legislation takes effect, then there'll be federal funds to train peace officers, and they can obtain grants. Local communities can obtain grants for the training because the training is essential.
I'd just say this is an area where we need all hands on deck, and it can't just be at the federal level, can't just be at the local level, can't just be philanthropy. It needs to be the fines and penalties from these criminals who create the demand for these services. And I think this represents real progress. But work that Children at Risk does is absolutely critical. All of the people who are currently on the playing field trying to do what they can to combat this scourge, keep it up. And what we're here to say is there is more help on the way. But the size of the problem is just so huge and really, as I said at the beginning, out of the line of vision and out of sight, out of mind for most people. I think raising the awareness, training peace officers is important, but all of this is important to be able to make some real progress.
Public-private partnerships are essential in this, essential. And we cannot just rely on the government, as was just said, on any of these issues at all. I might also add, we need our state legislations. And for this reason, I'll speak for my own state. Most of our state is very rural. And the only way that we can deal with these things is on a local level. But with the federal funding, we will also be able to enhance what we are unable to do in some of our really far out counties that have, the only way they can do is call an 800 number and they don't know what to do with a girl. So it's a huge partnership, a huge effort together, and that's why this is so important that we raise awareness, educate people, educate our officers, and more importantly, decide what we're going to do to help solve the problem along the way, like folks like you. Thank you very much. I'm getting a high sign over here, and thank you all so much for coming, and most importantly, I thank you for including me in this. These two gentlemen are really changing the game on this, and I just want to thank you so much for all the hard work that you do in Washington. Thank you.
So good afternoon. My name's Gerardo Interiano. I run public affairs for Google here in Texas. I am the father of 2 young daughters. So I was telling somebody yesterday after we did the event in Austin how inspirational and terrifying it was to listen to the comments that we heard today and to listen to the way the technology is being used. And to think that, I'm a digital native. I grew up with technology, but the fact that my kids are going to run circles around me. My 2-year-old knows how to unlock an iPad. And it's something that's natural to them. I give them a screen, and they'll go up to the TV and try to slide it because they think that's just how any device works. So at Google, we believe we were started with the mentality that technology can do great things. And what better issue for us to figure out how do we tackle than trying to end human trafficking and human slavery. So today it's my pleasure to introduce 3 great organizations that are great partners to Google. NCMEC, who has a great Texas office here as well, that's run by Andrea Sparks. The National Human Trafficking Resource Center, and Thorn. So we're going to get to hear from these great individuals. We have Angela Offmuth from NCMEC, Vanessa Johan from the Human Trafficking Resource Center, and Sarah Gardner from Thorn Digital Defenders of Children. So they're going to give a few short presentations, and then we'll go right into Q&A from there. Kick it off to y'all.
Great, thank you so much. My name is Angela Offmuth. I am the person who's representing the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or as he mentioned, we affectionately call it NCMEC. It's a whole lot easier. And I'm going to be talking with you today about how we know that technology is being used in these nefarious and insidious purposes by these traffickers to recruit and keep tabs on and intimidate these victims. But what we're going to really cover today is about how all of the things that we're doing for good, and we're turning that technology right back around on those traffickers to be able to locate these victims, provide services, identify these traffickers, and assist law enforcement in getting them in prison where they need to be. So for those of you who are not familiar with the National Center, it was started in 1984. We are a nonprofit organization that is congressionally mandated to perform 22 specific tasks regarding issues surrounding missing and exploited children and providing services to law enforcement and the families and the service providers that are assisting these children as well. And so one of the main tasks that we are performing is in regards to the case management, technical assistance, analytical assistance, and recovery planning services for missing child cases. And what we know from our data of all of the intaked missing children who have been reported to us is that the overwhelming majority of children who are reported missing to the National Center are what we call endangered runaways. So kids who they're believed to have voluntarily gone missing, and we know that they are most vulnerable to these traffickers. And what we know of that population is that kids who are endangered runaways and who are also missing from the child welfare system, they are much more vulnerable as well, because we know that these kids are in that system not because life has treated them well, but because of the abuse or neglect that they have already received at the hands of someone. And so then having that history and that vulnerability, these traffickers are able to capitalize on that, unfortunately, and these kids are much more vulnerable. And so what we see is that of endangered runaways who are involved with child sex trafficking, who are victims of this crime, is that the rate is increasing. And so last year in 2014, we know that 1 in 6 endangered runaways were believed to be involved with child sex trafficking. And since we started really tracking that data in 2012, we've seen it consistently go up. It started at 1 in 8, it went to 1 in 7, now we're at 1 in 6. Now, we also know that there's more awareness out in the field as far as the information that's being reported to us. We also know that we're doing a better job at the National Center on the front line in the call center with obtaining that information, asking those questions, talking about those red flags that are going to let us know that this child might be a victim. And so we're doing a better job of awareness, I think, across the board, but also it's a rising crime. I mean, it's out there, and as was mentioned previously, it's a business, and it is a business that has done well for the people who are involved in it, and so that is continuing to be lucrative for them, and so it's something that seems to be on the rise. So a way that we are utilizing technology in a very positive way is by running the Cyber Tip Line. And the Cyber Tip Line is the congressionally mandated reporting mechanism for all types of child sexual exploitation. And so obviously within that is child sex trafficking. We also know there are other types of child sexual exploitation that we see will have an overlap with trafficking, things like online enticement, where kids are being recruited by traffickers online via social networking, via very different ways. That way, we also see child pornography, where it can overlap, where these traffickers are taking pictures of these kids, sexually graphic photographs, and then maybe using those later to intimidate those victims of, if you try to leave, I'm going to send these to your family, I'm going to send it to your friends, and they're going to know what you are and what you've been doing. And so they use that as an intimidation ploy. And we also see child sex tourism can have an overlap with that as well. And so since the Cyber Tip Line was created in 1998, we've received over 3 million reports. Unfortunately, last year was a banner year. We have received over 1 million reports last year alone. But the good thing that we are able to do with that information is to have our analysts process the information that's given to us and then add value to that and get it out to law enforcement in those jurisdictions where those crimes might be occurring. So another way that we're assisting law enforcement is through our partnership with the Innocence Lost National Initiative. And that was created in 2003, and we joined hands with the FBI and the Department of Justice's Child Exploitation and Obscenity section to become part of that national initiative. So a way that you may have actually heard of this initiative but not have been aware was through the national operation called Operation Cross Country. And that's coordinated by the FBI. It's a nationwide sting, basically, for child sex trafficking. It's a coordinated effort where they are working with state and local law enforcement to have, it was a week long last year. It consisted of over 106 cities, and they are coordinating in the field to set up stings during that operation. They're working directly with the National Center, with our analysts on the child sex trafficking team, sending us real-time information in the field that they're developing on these victims and on these traffickers so that we can start running searches and trying to identify and add pieces to the puzzle of who these individuals are to get that back out to them. It was a very successful operation. It yielded the recovery of over 168 child victims and 181 traffickers. So it's a pretty big deal. Those are pretty high numbers. It's unfortunate every year we kind of say we want to beat those numbers from the last year, but we kind of don't, because we want this crime to be decreasing. But it highlights that in 1 week, that's what was able to be netted across the country, but we know that this is happening every day. And it's a really good time for us to talk about that when those operations occur and talk about how it highlights that it is happening every day in every city and every state across the country. So then one thing I want to touch on as I wrap up is just really sort of get into a little bit more the role of technology and how we are using it at the National Center to do good and to take the information that we're given and build on that to help law enforcement in the field. And so we're able to do that a couple of different ways with our image analysis and link analysis. And what I mean by that is law enforcement is able to contact us with information about a possible victim, possible trafficker, a buyer. And when we're looking at information coming in about these victims, we know, it was mentioned previously, these kids, they don't see themselves as victims. They're angry. They've been through a tremendous ordeal, a lot of abuse. And many times they're, one, not going to identify themselves as a minor, and two, they're not going to identify themselves as a victim, as a trafficking victim due to that abuse. And so law enforcement can contact us and say, here's a photograph of this child, here's the information they're giving us on themselves, name, possible date of birth, and so forth. And I'm pretty sure this person is not 19 or 20 like they're saying, and we can run that information against our system to see if we can identify that child as a known missing child reported to us, get that information back to them. We're also able to look at tattoos that these kids might have. We have information that we have compiled that we've seen in ads and that we've seen from children who are reported missing to us. We're able to search that information, utilize the tools from various companies that have donated those types of tools to us, like Google, and pull that together and get those matches back to law enforcement. We're able to do the same thing for the traffickers and the buyers as well, to really start running pieces of information, maybe a phone number, for a possible buyer, or a screen name for a trafficker, if that's maybe all that they have at the time, and pull all of those pieces together so that we have a more complete picture to send back to law enforcement. And the one thing I want to wrap up with is how technology is being used also for in the fields of education and prevention. And so, this is being recorded. We've had events that are being live streamed. And so we know that not only are we reaching the people in this room today, but we're reaching a whole bunch more people who are able to access this information. So that's increasing education and the awareness right there, which is huge. Because the more people know, the more they're able to act on that information. And we know that, of course, knowledge is power. And also, the way that we're able to use technology for prevention is to take the technology that traffickers are using to recruit and keep tabs on and intimidate these victims. We're able to then reach out to these victims and get more information out there to arm these kids with what to look out for and how to warn them on how to identify a possible trafficker. And if they're chatting with somebody online and it's going kind of askew, and maybe this is someone who's trying to recruit me for something, and I think we're just chatting. Or maybe I can help identify a friend of mine might be a victim of child sex trafficking by identifying those clues and those red flags, so getting that information out there. So I'll wrap up with that, but I did want to thank everyone for being here, for taking the time to attend, and also, of course, thank Google and the McCain Institute and Rights for Girls for including the National Center in this event. It's extremely important. Like it's been said, we have a lot of work to do, but I think we're on the right path. And I think with the work that our organizations are doing, we definitely have our work cut out for us, but we know where we can make an impact. So I look forward to being a part of the conversation with all these organizations as it continues to evolve going forward.
Good afternoon. I am Vanessa, and I'm with Polaris. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the National Hotline is doing, as well as what some of the other programs of Polaris are doing. So as you may be familiar, the National Hotline has been in existence since December 7, 2007. It's a 24-hour, year-round, toll-free resource available for victims and survivors of trafficking, family members, and anyone who maybe sees something suspicious, wants to report in a tip, or just learn more about what the issue of trafficking is. And so what we're doing on the hotline in terms of using technology is we are a connector. We want to make sure that we have all the resources for our callers so that we're connecting them to the best resource in their locality. We have a database of over 3,000 organizations, and what we're doing is trying to be as comprehensive as possible. We know that there aren't enough services, there aren't anti-trafficking providers in every single state or community in this country, and so we're thinking outside of the box. We're including related field providers such as DV organizations, SA organizations, runaway homeless youth shelters, and Angela mentioned tattoos. That's one way we know that traffickers are branding their victims is with tattoos, and they're usually putting them in prominent places. And so we're thinking outside of the box, and now we've compiled a list of pro bono tattoo removal artists that are available. So we're thinking both about long-term services as well as short-term and sort of additional services that people may not think about. And the way technology has really helped us with this is with our partnership with Palantir. we've been able to merge the two technologies, so our database with this Palantir map, so that when our call specialists are on our calls, they're able to, based on the city and state provided by our callers, are able to geolocate the best resource from where that caller is calling. Before, we were just skimming through our 3,000 organization database and connecting them to the closest big city. So this is a big improvement, and it's been working really great. Another area where we're using technology is data. Data is a huge need regarding this issue. People want to know what trafficking looks like in their communities. And there isn't much data out there. And the data that is out there is very inconsistent or it's very outdated. And we have a pretty large data source just by being a hotline for the past 7+ years. We're not a comprehensive data resource, but at least we're able to paint some picture of what trafficking may look like based on people's knowledge both of the issue of trafficking and of our hotline. And so we're able to look at trends, look at patterns. Are the same traffickers being mentioned over and over again? Are we seeing movement of how trafficking is moving across state lines? And so that's how we are using technology as well. To expand a little bit, we, with a partnership with Thorn, in early 2013, we introduced text messaging. So before that, through a grant through HHS, so the hotline is funded by HHS, we had our phone hotline, which is 24 hours, email, and then our web forms. And then with our partnership with Thorn, Polaris was able to introduce the Be Free SMS texting line. And that's been a fantastic resource for us to be able to reach youth. Phone is what they have in their daily lives. That's what they're using. That's what their pimps are making them use to set up dates, to advertise on Backpage. And so it's something they constantly have in their possession. And we are unique in that we're not a mandated reporter. We do follow reporting guidelines. But what not being a mandated reporter allows us to do is really take the time to build rapport with our victim callers, especially our minor victims, better assess for what their needs are, better assess for what kind of services are available to them. It's also been a fantastic tool for us to be able to intercept traffickers as the trafficking is occurring. So we have texted with multiple victims who've either just been recruited or are in a hotel and their pimp has maybe left the room for 30 minutes, and we're able to coordinate with law enforcement to be able to intercept that, to be able to give them real-time information about how to set up dates, about what exits they're passing, what landmarks they're seeing, and so we're able to better respond to these cases so that victims are getting the help that they need. So that's been a fantastic resource. Other ways that Polaris is using technology is through our data analysis program, and that's a fairly new program. It started a little over a year ago, and we've been realizing that we have been sitting on 7+ years of data, and how can we use that data towards eradication? So we're doing a little bit of what NCMEC does in that we're trying to do a lot more value add. We're using internet search engines, we're using publicly available databases to learn more about trafficking networks. What are the internal structures looking like, and how far across state lines, across country lines are these trafficking networks operating, so that we can prepare a package for law enforcement and say, here you go. This is what we're able to find out through our data and through publicly available resources. How can we dismantle these networks? How can we work towards eradicating some of these networks? So that's been something that we're now working on, and we're trying to pilot it with certain networks. So like illicit massage parlors, for example, and working a little bit by little, so network by network. And lastly, our global program. And with 7 years, we've been able to build some kind of national safety net. You know, my role is to identify all of the local stakeholders working on the issue so that our call specialists are able to connect our callers to both a 24-hour law enforcement response or a service provision response. And we're trying to build that same safety net in the global arena. We are getting, even though we're set up as a national hotline, the reality is that we're getting a lot of calls about trafficking overseas or victims who need help overseas. And there is a need to learn more about what is out there. Are there similar hotlines in the global arena? Are there other organizations that are focusing their work on anti-trafficking efforts? And how do we ensure that regardless of where you are in this world, you have a resource that you can connect within a few minutes? And so that's what we're doing. We're using our expertise learned from the hotline to be able to provide support. And through our partnership with Google, we've been able to map out a lot of organizations across the world. So we have the Global Modern Slavery Directory, which has over 1,000 organizations right now that are publicly accessible. And we're providing support to hotlines that either want to incorporate trafficking responses into their work or want to start up a hotline. So that's what we're using technology for. And I think I just want to close with, everyone wants to know how they can get involved. And I think education, as Angela mentioned, is very, very key. And I think one of the immediate things that people can implement is changing their language. And I think that's what the There's No Such Thing campaign is so fantastic in doing, is that if we can change our daily language. I'm the worst person to have at a party, because the minute I hear someone use pimp as a cool thing, I go into lecture mode. Pimping is not cool. Pimps are traffickers. And so if we can start changing our daily language, if we can use technology such as social media to be able to spread the word, I think that is a great step in the right direction. So, thank you.
Guys. My name is Sarah Gardner, and I'm with Thorn, Digital Defenders of Children. Our mission is to drive technology innovation to combat child sexual exploitation. So that's kind of a mouthful, and I kind of want to break it down into one example and then make sure we have time for questions, because it seems like a lot of you are working within this movement and would have a lot of additional input and great things to say. Just really quickly following up on the language thing, though, did you know that Jay-Z went back and has pledged to changing the word, can I say B-I-T-C-H, on my feed? Anyway, taking that out since he's had his daughter? That's a huge step. So our dream is to go back and say, like, okay, so now let's take out pimp, right? So there's like these small wins that go along the way with this work. But I kind of want to introduce the idea of time and this concept of time. I mean, you both touched on it, talking about the work that you do, but, you know, how we need to be more efficient with our time. So I think all of us can think of technology as a way or a mechanism by which time can be greatly reduced, right? You can do a lot more things a lot more quickly, or if you're me, you can get distracted by technology and read all the websites you're not supposed to read while you're working. But in general, it reduces the amount of time it takes to do something. Why is this important? Well, I went on Backpage for Houston today, and there were 209 ads posted by 11:09 a.m. And that's no dig at Houston. Like, you look at any major city, same deal. So when you think of law enforcement, and I know there's HPD in the room, so you guys know best, but you're faced with a really difficult task of having to mine through all of these ads. If there's already 200 by 11 a.m., you can imagine what it is by midnight, and discern which are the most high risk, which ones are representing kids that are in really bad situations. If you have an opportunity to do one sting that night, who are you gonna go after? And by go after, I mean who are you trying to meet up with to intercept and offer help resources? So Mrs. McCain mentioned Spotlight. That is a tool that we developed over the course of a few years after talking to 157 survivors of human trafficking in the U.S. about what their relationship with technology was when they were in the life and how they spent their time. And unfortunately, the sad reality was, I wake up, I go online, I post my ad. I have a customer. I go online, I post my ad again, so it moves to the top of the list. I have another customer. I have lunch. I go online again, I post my ad again. I'm texting my pimp to meet up with him later that day to give him the money that I've made that day. I'm texting the next buyer about what room to meet him in. And when you think about that, you realize, like, this person's hidden away in this room. These these digital moments, these footprints, if you will, or this trace is potentially the only sign of that person we'll see all day. And so our sort of mandate to ourselves was, how can we take this data that's out there and actually use it to find the kids that are in the most high-risk situations? How can we ingest those ads and create an effective pointer for law enforcement and first responders so that they can get in front of these kids as many times as possible? This was very, apparent in this recent case in Oakland, California. So as Mrs. McCain mentioned, the tool is in beta. It's being used across a number of states right now. It's being piloted West Coast, East Coast, and actually hopefully it's already being piloted in Texas with the ability to expand. But in the case of this 15-year-old girl, she was befriended by her pimp in an online chat room. Classic case of like, I love you, I'll take care of you, I understand your family woes. So she believed him, and she met up with him one day after school. He came and picked her up. He revealed that he was a gorilla pimp, which is the most extreme in terms of violence used to control one in this situation. So literally in a matter of hours, her life completely flipped upside down. He beat her, he raped her, and he started saying, now's your time, you're going to post your ad and start working for me. Meanwhile, her family reported to NCMEC. So NCMEC is also a beta test user of Spotlight, filed a missing persons report. So now we have a missing persons report for this child. What happens next is like the key part. It gets to an officer who's in San Jose, and he's able to type her phone number into Spotlight. So if you've ever seen these ads, the phone numbers are often encoded, so it'll say like 4, 3, and then they'll spell out 2, and then there'll be like a son, and then and the point of that is so that you can't Google phone numbers and match the ads much more quickly. So he put her phone number into the tool, and it surfaced, this was a few days later, that she'd already been posted, I think it was something like 10 to 12 times over the course of only a few days, and had been taken to Fresno, back up to Northern California, was already on a circuit. And he was able to see that her next ad was posted in Sunnyvale, which is in the same general area as Oakland, but is not Oakland. So in a previous time, you would have had officers just having to scan all of the ads, hoping that they would come across this individual. Now you picked her out in a matter of minutes, so you're reducing the amount of time down to a matter of minutes. They were able to set up a sting operation. They got her out of that situation. She immediately identified as a victim, but she'd only been in the life for a few days. And the senator brought this point up in Austin, it takes a couple times with kids and young adults who've been in it for a lot longer. So if we can use technology to increase those moments and take the 5 to 7 times that you need to meet up with that person before they're ready to get the help, instead of that happening over 2 or 3 years, 4 or 5 years, why can't we try and make that happen over the course of a few days or even, a few hours? We recognize that this is just the technology component, right? I'm not addressing prevention, which is a huge problem. That question about foster care is such an important one, and to be honest with you, we don't have an answer yet. And actually, we're starting to convene groups to look at the way technology can assist the foster care system, because we don't know, but it's a big problem. But we can use it once things are online to kind of intercept and reduce the amount of time it takes. So that's the human sort of component of all of this, is if we can reach these kids faster, their potential of recovery is so much higher. So I just wanted to sort of add in that one example. And then more generally about our work, driving technology innovation, why is that important? It's important because the perpetrators and the traffickers, as a lot of you had said today, are the most motivated individuals to hide their tracks. They are always the first to adopt whatever the cutting edge technology is in order for their own benefit, whether it's an anonymizing technology, virtual currency, they see that. They're looking for those opportunities. And the challenge is that we're often behind. We're catching up to them constantly. So our sort of response to that is, well, we need the best and brightest minds in technology to think about this. So we host these technology task forces with a bunch of engineers, a lot from Google. Google and the McCain Institute are big funders in this space and have affected all of our work in such a positive way, so that's important to mention. But we basically put all these engineers in a room and we say, here are the 5 problems we need to solve, like, go for it. And to see engineers from Facebook and Microsoft and Google and Twitter and eBay work together is really powerful, and they're really motivated to do it because they're bored of fixing their little glitch on their landing page in their company, and they actually want to do something meaningful and more useful. They are. It's true. So we've benefited from that. We've benefited from that untapped resource, I would say, and we need to keep our focus there because perpetrators are going to keep getting smarter. The technology is getting even more scary in that it's becoming more and more anonymous, and there could be a moment where we just can't find the kids because all of the metadata is scraped off all the photos and we can't figure it out. So rather than let that happen, let's try and get ahead of it now. So we're here to assist organizations like NCMEC and Polaris who have unbelievable tasks of managing the cyber tip line, the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and work with them to figure out what is the most innovative technology, how can we incorporate it into these 2 unbelievable organizations and make sure that we can get ahead. So that's a little bit about Thorn. Thank you.
All right, I think we're going to open it up for questions. We're going to bring you the mic. Again, please remember, since it's being recorded, to use a microphone before you ask your question.
Yes, I'm Bob Hartman. I'm with Catholic Charities. We're involved in international and domestic foster care. I'm wondering if there is a way, technology use here, to take fingerprints of children in foster care and link that to a national database for child welfare in some way. Foster parents, staff, volunteers of all of our organizations in child welfare are required to be fingerprinted. Could we do that with kids? And I have a number of, and we could do this locally, but ideas for ways we might involve child welfare staff in training for prevention and also PAL programs, preparation for adult living that kids are required to go through so that they are aware of the danger. But I'm just wondering if the fingerprinting is a prevention opportunity here and a connection to rescue kids.
I think that's a terrific idea. I mean, because fingerprints don't lie. They're pretty hard to alter. I think there's got to be a way that somebody out there, some sort of organization, would be able to kind of tap into that. I think that would be a hugely helpful resource to really link it all together because, I mean, if these kids get picked up, they're going to get fingerprinted. And so you're going to have that immediate match and not even having to have that lag time of trying to get that accurate information, you know, date of birth and a name and a photo and all of that kind of stuff. I think that's wonderful. I wish I was the person that could wave my magic wand and say, yes, done. But I think that's awesome, and maybe there's someone in this room who is that person, or they know a person who might be able to really kind of get into that. And I mean, who knows? Maybe it's something you know, for someone like Thorn to kind of think about. To get into what you were talking about with prevention for these kids and talking about the things that are already being done. You said with the PAL program, the preparation for adult living. I think that's a really good point. I mean, you've got these kids who are in this system who then age out and they're done. That's it. You're released to the wild and you're out of the system, cut loose. And so I think that's a hugely important program. And then cycled in with that is, and something that actually was raised yesterday after the panel event by someone who worked with CASA, talking about that prevention piece and talking about how do we train the people who are working with these kids to spot it, to know what to look for, and to talk to these kids about it in a way that is easily receptive, easily understandable, and then also provide the information to these kids, you know, like I mentioned earlier, to be able to identify and protect themselves and protect their friends and those around them. It's a hugely important piece. I know there are some organizations who are doing this already. In Fairfax County, near to where we are in Virginia, there has been a partnership and a curriculum that has been created utilizing law enforcement and social services and all the different organizations in that jurisdiction to come up with that prevention piece. And they have that curriculum that they're able to then start to distribute to schools, to various youth-serving organizations, to get that information out there. And I think that's something that's hugely important.
Don't you guys have a missing child kit recommendation that includes parents making sure that they get fingerprints? for their
Sure, we
kids?
do. We have a child ID kit that is easily accessible. All of that information is on our website, missingkids.org. So that can be extremely helpful. But I think having that link up, that sort of missing piece of that database, where all of those kids, specifically in care, I think is huge as well.
Good afternoon. I'm Gary Blankenship. I'm the United States Marshal for the Southern District here in Texas. And I'm joined by one of my senior inspectors who's the sex offender investigative officer for this area of Texas. On the fingerprint issue, we are testing some mobile APHIS machines right now in my district where, and actually the next part of it is it's an iPhone app for my deputies. And if we could have some coordination with the National Center to have those fingerprints inputted, my task force deputies that are out on the street every day, we would be able to identify those people. We have a pretty good working relationship with the Houston Police Department right now where they have one in, it's kind of in the process of being developed, but the mobile APHIS systems, it's basically an iPhone that you can just put people's index fingers on and identify. And we would be able to do that if we could link those databases.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for being here and sharing that information.
Trends. What trends are you seeing at the hotline?
With regards to child trafficking?
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of them, a lot of child sex trafficking cases come out of the foster care system. And so the importance of training child welfare and foster care facilities has been elevated. So to answer some of your questions, there are some great states that are doing amazing work and have really incorporated human trafficking awareness, education, and identification response into their protocols. And they're always willing to share their expertise. So child welfare has become a priority. With minors specifically, what we're seeing is that the traffickers aren't always strangers. We're seeing a lot of intimate partner / familial trafficking. A lot of them are being sold by their parents into the commercial sex trade in exchange for drugs to feed their drug addictions. And so we're seeing traffickers come in a variety of different forms, so it's not just strangers that they meet online, it's not just pimps that they meet at the bus station, it's also parents that are trafficking them and other family members that are trafficking them. So that's been a trend that we've been seeing. On the labor trafficking side, we're seeing a lot of magazine sales crews, the door-to-door sales for magazines and high-end cleaning equipment. Who buys $75 worth of cleaning materials? But that's what they're selling door-to-door. So we're seeing a lot of that trending as well.
Well, it's sort of a question and just sort of a request. I was wondering if, Angela, can you speak to the current initiative that's going on with NCMEC in Texas that Andrea.
Well, we have been working closely with Texas to get all kids who are, reported missing from care to have that MOU stood up. And then, of course, there's the national legislation that was recently passed with HR 4980, where there's a whole bunch of words in that. And then within that, there's one little sentence about how the system is required not only to report these kids missing to law enforcement, but also to the National Center. So that's something we've been trying to stand up as well, so that we are ready for the onslaught of that reporting mechanism. We do have a couple of states, a couple of locations that are working with us directly already to report all their kids missing from care. And obviously, we've been working with Texas as well. I don't know if there's anything specific that, you kind of wanted to cover from that. But I mean, we definitely have been working with Florida and with Illinois to get all that online and to get that stood up so that we can support the legislation and so forth.
So thank you to the panelists for joining us today and for the great work that you guys do to address this really important issue. I'd like to invite Senator Cornyn and Congressman Poe to give closing remarks.
Well, I personally want to express my gratitude to each of you for being here today, but particularly our sponsors for making this possible. This, as you heard, was the second of a two-day road show that started in Austin yesterday, and I personally feel like I've benefited a lot just from hearing what each of us are doing in our own unique way, perhaps, to combat this terrible scourge. But I think there's also some ideas that we can actually, I was telling Ted that when this legislation is, when we pass it from the Senate and match it up with the House bill, we'll actually go perhaps to a conference report. We'll see how that works, and there may be some ways for us to actually tweak it in ways to incorporate some of the good ideas that have come up here. I guess one of our biggest challenges is the fact that this just seems like such a huge, daunting, immense challenge, and you perhaps are left to wonder, as I sometimes wonder, what can I do? What can one person do to make a difference? Well, I'm reminded of what Mother Teresa said, that what is the ocean but drops of water? And each of us can do our part. Yes, we may just be a drop of water, but our cumulative impact can truly be enormous. And I think the visibility of this issue as a result of these programs, the great work that's being done around the country, the ideas that you've had and the experience you've had that you can bring to combating this problem are going to be drops in the water that cumulatively will allow us to feel like we really are able to make a difference in the lives of these children who are unable to protect themselves. And so thank you for being here, and want to thank my friend and partner, Congressman Ted Poe, for the great work he's doing over in the House, and turn it over to him.
Thank you, Senator, and thanks for what the Senate is doing to make the legislation that's proposed a reality, and it's very good legislation. The sense of the people in this country is moving in a direction where they are outraged with the fact that children are being sold in the United States. And their outrage is justified because of all of the things that you know and that you hear and that you see. We are moving in the direction where children are not for sale and will not be for sale. And our communities will not tolerate the sale of children or the sale of adults. It's not going to be allowed in this country. And we're all in this together, from law enforcement to the different great victims organizations, many that are here, Google, technology, the legislative branch. We're all in this to fight, as the senator said, the scourge that's taking place in America. Slavery was abolished in the United States by the 13th Amendment. But some say there's more slavery worldwide now than ever in the history of people. And it's in the form of human trafficking, the sale of people for sex. And we're going to put an end to it. It is a big task, but I think we're not only up to it, we have the ability to solve this problem and rescue those victims and treat them like victims. The idea that these traffickers are so arrogant that they brand victims and children because they're property to them. We're going to stop that. And it's all about people. Many of them are young people, young girls, but it's all about people. When I was in Central and South America, I met a little girl named Lily. She was 7 and was sold by her mother to a trafficker for a cell phone. And she's just one of many, many children in the whole world, including the United States, that find themselves in a situation that they should not be in. So I want to thank all of y'all, especially y'all that are dealing with victims on a personal basis, for what you do to stop this scourge, to make sure we do right by victims of crime, and that the bad guys get their day in court. And that's just the way it is. Thank you very much.